massive thank you to everyone that has taken some time out of their evening this evening. It's not lost on me that we're talking about boundaries and balance and well-being, and you guys have attended a session outside of work time. We really appreciate you being here and really hope that you take away something that will support you moving forward. Some of you may well have been at sessions that I held before the summer where we were talking about the mental health and well-being of children and young people, and actually those sessions are important, but this session really is crucial for us because, you know, I was a Senko for a long time and worked with a brilliant team of teaching assistants, LSAs and HLTAs, and, you know, you work so hard. I don't think I've met a more passionate group of people in education, and so this evening's conversation is a really important part of what we do in terms of supporting you and helping you to think about what those boundaries and balance might look like, but also thinking about the wider expectations that organisations should be supporting you in those boundaries and supporting your well-being. So we will have a Q&A session at the end, so hope anything that comes up, please do pop it into the Q&A this evening and we can get to that at the end, but let's crack on. So we've only got 45 minutes. We're going to try and get through a lot in that time. We're going to think about what healthy boundaries look like, thinking about how we set those boundaries, how we protect that energy. You know, teaching assistants and LSAs and HLTAs, you have such brilliant energy and bring such passion to your role. How do we ensure that is allowing you to stay connected to your purpose? Some really practical strategies, hopefully, to help you with that, and some top tips to think about how we maintain that balance and resilience. So I want to start really with a very important question, and I want you to reflect on this, and I want you to think about who's in your team. Who do you have that is there to support you? Now, it doesn't have to be someone at school, it could be someone at home, it could be a friend. But I'm asking you this because it may be that some of the things that we talk about in the next 45 minutes bring up some feelings or some experiences that might be quite challenging, and we want you to make sure that you're looking after yourself. But also, in order to protect our well-being and have boundaries, you know, we need to have those connections, that network to support us. So please do kind of think about who that person is in your team, but also remember that there are some brilliant Facebook groups that we run that are a really fantastic opportunity for you to connect with others, for you to kind of share challenges that you might be facing, to see that other people are facing those challenges, and, you know, some really brilliant supportive people in those groups. So do think about joining one of those TA communities on Facebook if you do use Facebook. But also Education Support is a charity that offers ongoing support to anyone who works in education who may be struggling with their mental health and well-being. So, you know, if at this point or at the end of the session you're thinking, actually, you know, I am really finding the things I'm doing challenging, do reach out to Education Support, do ask for some help. You absolutely deserve that. I think quite often in education we can all kind of fit into this martyr role where we have to give our all, and it's a passion and we want to do the best for our children and people, and that's absolutely fine. But if we don't look after ourselves, then we cannot do that. So that's where we're starting. So hopefully you've thought about at least one person that you could talk to after this session if you felt you needed to. So we're starting here, and last year the Teacher Wellbeing Index highlighted some really key struggles for teaching assistants, and I just wanted to talk through some of those now, because these are the sorts of things that might impact on our well-being. And the top one, you won't be surprised to know, was behaviour that challenges. So predominantly behaviour of children and people. But in that last 12 months from the index, 64% of support staff, which includes teaching assistants, had witnessed violence at work. 64%. I mean, that's an incredible number. 98% of those who reported violence said it had come from pupils. However, there was a significant chunk of people that had seen violence coming from parents, carers as well, and a smaller number, but not insignificant, who'd seen violence from other members of staff. And we cannot underestimate the impact of just witnessing, but also maybe being on the receiving end. And I know that I've seen a few different posts on a few of the different Facebook groups that I'm on where people have talked about their one-to-one who is displaying behaviour that challenges, and that ends up being, you know, in violence. And it's really difficult to continue to do that role every day and it not have an impact on you. 2022 report found that 53% of TAs, compared to only 6% of teachers, had experienced physical violence from a pupil, and that's just incredibly difficult to manage. Then there was the school capability and capacity, and really this boiled down to increasing workload. You know, the expectation that TAs are able to do all of the magical things that you're expected to do in a short amount of time, and often lack of space as well. So having to deliver interventions effectively when you don't have the time to gather the students up, to do the preparation, etc. And that can lead to a sense of failure. And that's one of the things that came up in this research, was that teaching assistants want to do a good job. Of course you do. And when you don't have the time and the capacity to do it to your best ability, that makes you feel like you're not doing your best by the students, which I understand. I felt that as a teacher quite often as well. And for many teaching assistants, you are often seen as the person responsible for a particularly young person. And that can be really difficult, particularly if that young person has, you know, really high challenges, and you are seen as the person that needs to fix the issue in a class or sort those things out. That can be really difficult. Social media or tech was mentioned, and actually this was in the context of children, young people being on social media and tech, and children's positive and healthy development being damaged by excessive phone use, problematic use of technology, and you know, the impact that was having on children, and therefore the way it made it more difficult for teaching assistants to kind of work with those children. And then the aftermath of COVID-19. You know, I think we're going to be talking about the aftermath of COVID-19 for a very long time, even though it's, you know, 5 or so years since a pandemic started. The impact on all of us, but particularly children, young people, really struggling with their learning, their emotional well-being, all of that kind of links back, doesn't it, to that behaviour that challenges as well. So we just wanted to start by putting that into context with some of the things that the people in your roles have shared that are challenging. And I'd love to say that I've got the answers to all those problems this evening. Unfortunately, I don't. That is a really, you know, a difficult kind of scenario, but hopefully we're going to give you some sense of how you might protect your boundaries in this space if you are finding yourself facing challenges. So what do we mean by, so I've talked here about professional boundaries, and what we mean is that when you're in your role, you need to have boundaries in place in order for you to do your role effectively. So the Mark Groves quote there is, walls keep everybody out, boundaries teach people where the door is. So boundaries aren't about saying no to everything. They're not about pushing people away, but what they are about is teaching people how to relate to you in a way that respects your needs and allows for genuine, healthy connection. And we need to do that in our personal life, but we absolutely need to do that in our work life as well. What we're not talking about are the walls that keeps everyone out. And in terms of professional boundaries, they are limits on a relationship. So, you know, you will quite often be working really closely with a child and young person more than any other member of staff in a school. You may have a closer relationship with the parents or carers because of daily communications, etc. And that can make those boundaries really blurred sometimes, but it's so important that you have clear boundaries and expectations for yourself in terms of how you will conduct your role in order to, yes, protect the child and the young person, but also to protect yourself, to make sure that you've got those really clear boundaries in place. It says they're like the riverbanks to the river, allowing work to take place in a defined space. So we want the river to flow, we want the work to happen, but we need it to happen in a particular place. And so in terms of professional boundaries, that really means knowing and understanding your role, what that is, where that stops and starts. And that can be really difficult in a school. That can be really difficult when you have lots of competing factors, which I'm sure we will go on to talk about later on. But it is really about thinking professional boundaries are a professional responsibility. So it's important that you hold those boundaries. So this is an interesting question, isn't it? What is the role of a teaching assistant? We've got about 170 of you on the call at the moment, and if I picked a few of you out just now, I'm sure there would be a great variation of what the expectations are of your roles in your different schools. Here we have this is from the professional standards for teaching assistants in 2016. It should be to work with teachers to raise the learning and attainment of pupils while also promoting their independence, self-esteem and social inclusion. They give assistance to people so they can access the curriculum, participate in learning and experience a sense of achievement. Easy, and it should be straightforward, but once you then bring in, you've got 30 children in a classroom, you've got different teachers that you might work to, particularly if you're in secondary, it can be the lines can become blurred, can't we? I know that there will be lots of you in here that are regularly asked to do photocopying, for example, and many of you will do that willingly because it will help the teacher in A, B or C situation. But there'll be others in the room who have, are expected to do things that are not within their job description, and that can be increasingly challenging. So when we're talking about boundaries, the first really clear boundary we need to set is, what is my job role? What does my job description say I should be doing? And at what points am I being asked to come outside of that? And how am I going to deal with that? How am I going to have those conversations? Because they're not easy conversations, but they're important conversations. And so holding boundaries starts with having a clear understanding of what your role is, and therefore what the expectations of you are and what the expectations of you shouldn't be. So whenever I'm doing work, and I've run this session for lots of different groups of people, all through the different levels of ages around education, we always think about the types of boundaries, because it helps us to then kind of pin down, I hadn't thought about that as a boundary. I hadn't thought about that as something that might, I might be crossing or someone else is crossing. So we're going to talk through some of these boundaries, and I'm sure you will be thinking of some of them as we go through. So time boundaries is probably one of the biggest ones, which is why I'm going to start with that one. Being asked to stay late frequently, when people assume that you are there to be able to attend meetings, even though your contract finishes at 3:15, you're quite often expected to work outside of hours without prior notice, and that will have an impact long term if it keeps happening. Be expected to stay for meetings after school clubs, or finishing tasks to prepare for the next day. I'm sure many of you will recognize this kind of expectation of staying outside of hours. Being asked to perform duties during your lunch breaks, so when you should be actually sitting down and recharging, you're then having to go off and deal with X, Y and Z. And for some of you, it might even be taking work home. It might be that you've got interventions that you just don't have time to prepare during the day, and so therefore you are taking work home. Now, I know lots of brilliant teaching assistants who are really strong on their time boundaries, and they still get the job done, but they are realistic about what they can do in the time that they have, and they are really clear on that they're not going to take that work home. They are not paid to do that. We're not going to get into a big discussion about pay, but let's all agree that teaching assistants do not get paid enough. The expectation for you to work outside of your hours is pretty ridiculous, really. I think that the 2024 Unison's annual support staff survey highlighted the increasing workload of teaching assistants. 80% increase in teaching assistant workload in the last 12 months. 80%, that's just incredible. You will have seen, I'm sure, in your schools, the number of teaching assistants reduced, and that means therefore that the work for those of you left will increase. 40% of support staff say they're leading more interventions, and that's affected their workload. 40% say they're providing class cover, and 32% of staff say an increased expectation to just do general admin duties, all affecting their workload. So there's lots of those things, those time boundaries that are being challenged. Physical boundaries, so having to work in busy classrooms where you're trying to keep your kind of personal space can be really challenging. I've worked with lots of young people where they have zero idea about personal space and are kind of there and up, and I guess sometimes this is more relevant in primary than secondary, but absolutely I worked in secondary and had lots of young people that really struggled with that idea of personal space, and how do we keep ourselves safe and keep ourselves feeling comfortable. Inappropriate physical contact from students, whether that's unintentional or not, it can make it very difficult within the classroom. And just being asked to do kind of manual tasks, the lifting and the moving of heavy objects without proper training or assistance or equipment, and that can quite often be an expectation and potentially could lead to injury, which can have really long-term impacts. The emotional boundaries, I think, are quite often the most common. How do you work closely with a young person or a child with SEND needs without getting overly involved in their personal lives? Particularly difficult when often teaching assistants are the key contact with family and school, aren't you? And you are the person that is having those really important conversations with parents and carers, and kind of advocating for the child. And you can form really strong bonds, particularly if you're a one-to-one with a child and you're seeing them all day, every day. That relationship can be then difficult to keep that personal distance and not take on the emotional burden of what that student might be experiencing at home that you aren't able to deal with. So dealing with challenging students or parents' behaviour, and one of the most stressful things for me when I was a SENCO was actually dealing with the parents, not the children. So you might end up being the target of frustration, unreasonable demands from either the students or the parents, and maybe don't have the support or the training in de-escalation. Witnessing or dealing with difficult situations, so not having the opportunity to process what you've seen. You're often on that front line and really do see some of those sensitive issues arising, and this expectation that you're kind of taking on a therapist or a counsellor role, which I absolutely don't feel anyone in education should be doing, because none of us are trained to do that. But if you are the closest adult to a child or a young person in school, naturally they are going to share things with you that they're finding challenging, and that can have an impact. And then we've got material and financial boundaries. So, some of you may be buying things for the classroom out of your own pocket because you want to have this resource, but it can become a slippery slope, can't it? It can become an expectation. And, in terms of material things, maybe using your mobile phone. For how many of you have got your emails on your mobile phone? How many of you have some of the kind of the software that you might have on your mobile phone, which makes things really easy during the day in school, and that can be really helpful. But then when you get home, it's still on there. I've just had to, when I was a teacher, had to kind of try and put on boundaries in terms of not getting notifications at different times. I was terrible at it. I still read my emails at ridiculous times. But it's those sorts of things that can have a real impact. And then sexual boundaries. I mean, obviously sexual boundaries should be fairly clear and hopefully not need too much explanation, but it is also about kind of language and jokes that might be made within the classroom or the staff room, but also those social boundaries around being expected to be alone with a child at any particular time, when we know that our safeguarding guidance tells us to kind of try and avoid that if we can, but obviously that's really difficult. Social situations in terms of how we interact with our colleagues when we're talking about children and young people as well, but also social situations, particularly if you work near the school that you teach at. It can be really difficult if you have friends who are also parents, and those boundaries can get really, really difficult. And then just something else from the TA Digest, 7% of the survey respondents had personally experienced sexual harassment at school over the past 5 years. So we know that is a growing challenge, and thinking about how we can hold those boundaries, and certainly thinking about how we report, is absolutely crucial. So I'm just going to ask you to get some feedback from you just quickly. If you can scan that QR code, and just give me a little bit of an insight. I'm literally going to keep this up for a minute. So if you scan the QR code or put the number in, I'm going to give you just a minute to do this, because I do want to kind of try and get onto the things that we can do to help, rather than all of the things that are a challenge. So if you can time, so time, not surprised. Time. Yeah, behaviour, time. It's really interesting. Okay, there's definitely a theme here, everyone. Doing extra in goodwill. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, definitely a theme. Time and behaviour. The way I'm spoken to. Yeah, absolutely. You know, sometimes we're polite people, aren't we? And we don't want to have confrontation. But yeah, workload, CPOMs with parents. I'm assuming that's parents messaging in. Time expectation of volunteering. Behaviour management. Thank you. Yeah, the chance to plan. Going above and beyond and as being a sounding board for parents. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so having different roles. First aid responsibility. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. There are so many on here. I really appreciate that. I'm going to move on simply because I want to get through some of the others, but thank you so much for sharing those duties, breaks. Any questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll answer them at the end. So why are boundaries so important? Well, that list that you've just shown me and why boundaries are so important. We need, our top priority has to be us. And yes, children, young people are important. That it would be ridiculous to suggest anything else. But our well-being has to be the priority, because if we don't have good well-being, we can't do a good job with our children and young people. I experienced burnout at the end of my teaching career. I was not doing a good job in the last few months of my teaching career because I was not sleeping. I was constantly thinking about some of the students that I was working with as a Senko. I felt like I was failing everyone, and it's just a vicious cycle. And I know I wasn't doing a good job. I needed to look after my own well-being. I didn't. Ensuring we can do our job properly. So you've highlighted some of those things. Having the time to actually plan and do that properly. We need to have good boundaries for the safety and well-being of children and people, and it's good for our employers if we have good boundaries. They might not think it at the time when you're pushing back, but it's really important that we do. And so we're going to think about a few of the things that we might do. The power of saying no. I do want everyone to kind of recognize that no is, an okay word. It's okay to say no to things. Many people go into these roles because they're passionate about it, because they want to change people's lives. They want to do something special for the people that they work with. And we quite often feel saying no makes us less than, or makes us not as good as other people that are saying yes to everything. So when should we say no? We should absolutely say no when the request is outside of our role and our working hours. And it can feel really difficult, and it can feel, particularly if you're not used to doing it, but it is an important part of holding those boundaries. And when we aren't trained in that specific area, if it puts us at risk and we're not trained, when we feel uncomfortable, we have to go with our instincts as well, in order to recognize, actually, I don't feel safe doing X, Y, and Z. I need you to give me more support. I need you to give me more input so I can understand what I'm doing in this space. And how do we say no? And we can, think about this in situations that you might have going through your head at the moment. It's just about being firm but friendly. So we don't have to throw a hissy fit. We don't have to stomp around and slam doors. It is just about saying, actually, I appreciate that you've asked me that, but I can't do that because I finish at 3:15, or I can't do that because actually that's not part of my role. You're going to have to ask someone else to do that. Being really clear on your reasons. So yeah, it's not actually in my job description to do the photocopying, so I won't be able to do that for you. And yeah, you'll get some kind of reactions to that, but there needs to be a systemic approach. If teachers don't have time for the photocopying, passing it on to you is not helping. We need to think about what needs to be done, what admin support needs to be in place to make that happen. Always referring back to your roles and responsibilities, and if you need to, go into your line manager and putting it in writing if necessary. So, following up with a conversation. Thanks for that conversation. I just wanted to be clear. This is why I said I can't do that. And this is, this is where it says it in my job description, etc. Being really open about it, being really friendly about it, but just saying, actually, I'm not going to be able to do that. And it's okay to say no. I just want you to take a couple of minutes to think about, and you can write this down, or you can just think about it in your head, because we're going to go through something in a moment where it'll be useful for you to have some things already in your mind. So if you're thinking when you're going in to start tomorrow, what are the things that are playing on your mind? What are the things that are in your head that you might be thinking about on a daily basis? Just jot them down somewhere if you've got a piece of paper in front of you, or just have a think of them. I'm going to give you a minute or so, and then I'm going to talk you through another approach that might be helpful. And again, this is why I asked you at the beginning to think about someone that you can speak to, because sometimes just doing something like this can feel overwhelming. So if it does, stop. I can't see you doing it anyway, so it's fine. If you don't feel comfortable doing it, then that's absolutely fine. Okay, so what else? This is one of the most common things I talk about with children, with young people, and with adults, because I do coaching with education staff as well. And this is one of the most common things I talk about. It's the circles of control. And what I invite people to do is to think about the 3 areas of the circle of control. So in the middle of the circle of control are the things that you can actually control. So the things that you have any kind of control over. So you can control how much effort you put into your job. You can control how organized you are. You can control how you communicate within your role. So you can control not being rude or dismissive, or you can control making sure that you've got things ready for the next day. To an extent, if someone else bundles in and gives you another job, that becomes more problematic. But there are a few things that you can control, and those things go in the middle. Then we've got the circle of influence. Now, the circle of influence, as it suggests, as it says on the tin, are things that we might be able to influence, but we can't control them. Okay, so learner behavior is one of them, and that's one of the things that came up on that Slido several times, was behavior. We can try and influence learner behavior, and we can influence learner behavior by the things that we can control. So by our behavior, by our approach, by our use of language, by our tone of voice, etc., by us and building a relationship with this young person, we can influence those things. We categorically cannot change a young person's behavior ourselves. That's them. That is all down to them. So whilst we can influence it, we cannot change it, in exactly the same way as with parents and carers. We can influence it by being proactive, by communicating clearly, by, having regular meetings, whatever it is that you do. We can influence how parent carers communicate. We cannot control it. And so they may still send a snarky email to the head about something that we've done that they perceive as being completely out of order. So we can influence it, but we can't. Similarly with colleagues' behavior, it's in the circle of influence. We can potentially influence how a colleague behaves, or the teacher that we're supporting behaves, in our communication and our behavior, but we cannot control it. They absolutely are in control of that themselves. And then the outer circle is the circle of interest. Now, these are the things that are really frustrating. And actually, I feel like these are coming at us left, right, and centre at the moment, aren't they? So we've got the Ofsted framework, we've got the SEND reforms coming. We've got school budgets, we've got all of those things that are in the circle of interest. They're in the circle of interest because they will impact us. They will have an impact on us, but we can do nothing about them. We might be able to lobby our MP, or we might be able to vaguely do things like that, but ultimately we can't do anything about them. So if and when we're feeling really overwhelmed, or feeling just like we aren't able to cope, a really helpful thing to do is to sit down and take all of those things that you just did in that last activity, where you were thinking about everything that was in your head, and just put it like, what can I control? What are the things I can actually do anything about? That is where I'm going to put my energy. That is where I'm going to focus. I can't do anything about the fact that the teacher I support is rude and disorganized. I can make sure that I am organized and I'm in the right place at the right time, and I can potentially speak to my line manager about the experience I'm having. I cannot do anything to control them. So thinking about those different circles can be a really helpful way of dealing with any overwhelm. none of this happens overnight. These are things that you need to do and practice. And I've been talking about it for a bajillion years and I still don't get it right. So I want you just to think back to that original list you had and think about those things that are really impacting your well-being. What is in your control? So we've talked about two really key things. We've only got 45 minutes, which doesn't give us enough time to go into lots of things in detail, but we talked about that power of saying no. So what do you need in order to be able to feel comfortable saying no? And we talked about control. So what are the things that are in, that you are maybe preoccupied with thinking about that you can actually control? How can you focus your energy on those things that you can control and leave the circle of influence and interest to be as it is and let it kind of happen? And sometimes, I can't sit here and tell you how to kind of fix things at school, fix the boundaries, because there's so many external factors. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just focus on what you need and what you can control. And that control might be taking a day off when things are too difficult. And I know that might sound, controversial to some people, but if you're really struggling, and we'll talk about that in a minute, that only thing you might be able to control is saying, I'm not going to put myself in that situation just now. And I know that will be a really difficult thing for people to consider. But if you've gone through all the other things and you've talked to all the right people and you've shared the challenges you're facing, sometimes that's the only thing you can control. So signs you might be struggling, so signs that you might be finding things difficult, are you're eating, you're sleeping, you're moving, you're connecting. Like, they're the basics for anything around mental health and well-being. If those things start to deteriorate, so either eating too much or too little, sleeping too much, too little, just not moving, just kind of sitting and not having energy to do anything, not wanting to connect with people, those are signs that you might be experiencing burnout. Now, as I said, I experienced burnout when I was in teaching. I have no clue. I know now, with all the knowledge I have now, I could see it, but I didn't know at the time. It might be that you have a change in temperament. So normally you're quite happy-go-lucky, quite positive, and you find yourself being quite negative. So that might be a sign you're struggling to concentrate, a bit snappier maybe. All those prolonged feelings of being low or anxious. So we all go through phases of being low and anxious. That's normal. That's being a human. But when they are prolonged, when we're feeling them day in and day out over weeks, maybe months, then that's when we might need to think about, actually, do I need to ask for some help and support with the situation? So what are the key things to holding boundaries? So in terms of holding boundaries, trying to remember why you're doing the job that you're doing. And for the vast majority of you, it's because of the children and young people. And that isn't to make yourself feel guilty. That's to remind yourself that I need to look after myself in order to be able to do a good job. And so therefore, I need to think about what my why is. It's children, young people. What can I control in order to make them successful, or my job to be supporting them to be successful? Maybe having something that is a reminder of that. I am sure all of you will have had a card or a thank you card or a thank you something or other from a student or a child or a parent at some point. I pretty much guarantee it. Where do you keep that? Do you keep it close by as a reminder that you do a good job and that you need to look after yourself, and that holding your boundaries is part of that? And really try and reflect regularly on that positive impact you have on students. Quite often in SEND, and this is the same for children and people as well as the staff that work for you. As a Senko, I'd walk around the school and I'd very rarely get a member of staff come up to me and go, oh, this student was brilliant in my class today. They did really well. Thank you for supporting them. I would get, child has been a nightmare, or you need to sort this child out, or this is, and you will get that as well. And we quite get into this negative mindset. So trying to reflect regularly on the positive impact you're having on students is really important. We've talked about saying no. Absolutely, some of you will want to help at XYZ. That's fine. We're not building walls, remember. We're thinking about, sometimes you might be able to support in a way that you wouldn't normally, but you would want to be clear, I can do that this time because of X, Y, and Z, but if I'm staying late, I will be taking the time back, or I will be doing you'll be explaining yourself and how that will work. Be really clear on defining your work hours. What can you do in between work and home to relieve some of the stress? So, for some of you, you'll have small children, and that is like the highest moment of stress, because you're stressed at work and then you come home and you've got children that are going to stress you out as well. Not that your children are stressful, but they just do, don't they? So what can you do in that in between time? Avoid overcommitting. Really be clear on the policies and procedures in your school. So what are the expectations? What's the behaviour policy? How do I follow that through? How do I make sure that other people are following it through, so that I'm not the one that ends up having to pick up the pieces all the time, which is quite often the case, isn't it? And think about how you can prioritise self-care. And some of these things might seem like, well, that's never going to happen. But if you can make it happen, it can be really, powerful. So scheduling micro breaks. So I've got a podcast and I was talking to somebody who does mindfulness, and she was talking about the idea of just being really pausing and being present, even if it's just for a minute, where you just stand in a space and you just stop, preferably somewhere where no one can find you. Find a cupboard, just stand in the cupboard, take a moment, stretch, breathe, regroup. It's okay to take a moment out, particularly if you're working with a child or young person that's really you're finding it difficult, they're really pushing your buttons, which happens. Taking that time out is okay, and asking someone else to take over is okay. Prioritizing those basics. So how do we prioritize sleep, hydration? That is such a difficult one, isn't it? We could probably do a whole workshop on that, because we know that we feel better when we're hydrated, but we also know that it's really difficult to go to the toilet during the day. So it's about finding that balance of how do we hydrate and look after ourselves whilst also running from classroom to classroom, etc. But we know that hydration and food can impact our well-being as well. Don't feel guilty for taking time for yourself. It's essential, not selfish. So really thinking about, if you've got a break and you want a break, you need to take that break. And sometimes someone will ask you as a favor to cover their duty or what have you. Sometimes you're just going to have to say no, because you need to have that break. It's really important. Keep growing. So keep doing what you're doing brilliantly, which is finding CPD opportunities, building that skill set. Learning new skills is a protective factor. We know that supports us if we're struggling with our well-being. Talked about keeping a positive file, so all those cards you get that said how brilliantly you're doing, keep them somewhere. Celebrating the small wins, and share those success stories. So do it with each other as well, if you can, with colleagues, and thinking about how you can build connections with other TAs. And yes, that could be in your school, but again, it could be on the Facebook groups here as well. Never be afraid to ask questions and clarify why something is being asked of you. Don't just accept it because someone is more senior and has told you to do it. Do it in a way that's polite and you're not kicking off, but thinking about how you would do that. I'm just very aware of time. I do just want to try and see if we can find out. I think we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. Are there any things that you're setting or already doing that support you holding your boundaries? I'd be interested to know if that is the case. I'll give you a minute or so to fill that in, and we can also come back to these. We can include your responses on this into the follow-up. Got anything for anyone? Okay, staff wellbeing ambassadors, brilliant. That's good. Yep, so having your lunch for later. Nothing, not a lot. Okay. No work messages from 6, or that's brilliant, from 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. Don't worry if you can't think of any. Regular supervision meetings. Wow, that is amazing. We have a counsellor. Good. Okay, so it's a real dichotomy, isn't it? We've got different people that wellbeing days. Make sure we leave on time. No emails after 6 p.m. And so, yeah, it breaks my heart for those of you that can't think of anything. Some schools are clearly getting it right. Supervision every term. That makes my heart sing. Wellness Wednesdays. Treats like donuts. It's just regularly hitting out, tapping out. Yep, tapping out with a member of staff so you can go work with a different child. That's brilliant. But nothing is done. We used to have teammates, not anymore. Yeah, it's no good having ambassadors if nothing happens, is it? That's even more frustrating. 2 wellbeing days to book a year. That's great. Okay, one being wellbeing voucher every term, if that counts, absolutely. I'm just so pleased I'm seeing so much supervision and regular check-ins coming up, because that is absolutely crucial and does not happen enough. And so some ideas there of what other schools can be doing. By a group chat, everyone knows where we are and how we're feeling. Fabulous. Okay, thank you so much. Some brilliant points there. Just some ideas of that could happen. Again, I think what's really important to say about these ideas, these are all lovely things to have, but they should be like the icing on the cake. So things like supervision, reflective practice, finishing on time, those should be the norm. And then we can have things like affirmation posters, recipes, treat jars, journals, those sorts of things feel great, don't they? I remember, I kind of use this example all the time. I was really stressed at work. There was really low morale at one point at our school, and the head teacher bought everyone donuts. I could not have cared less about the donuts that he bought us, because we were all really tired and miserable because of other things that were going on. And so the donuts meant nothing. So these things are brilliant, great, if you've got those kind of bottom line things in place, which it sounds like some people have and some people maybe not have. So things that we can expect from our settings, and I realise I'm going over a little bit over time. I've got 2 minutes. Really clear job descriptions that we stick to. A really clear communication of expectations. That's something I would expect, if you're based in a classroom, if you're primary, that your teacher is giving you really clear expectations, reasonable expectations of how you're going to work together, and you can do the same back to them. It can be more challenging in secondary when you're going through you're following a child rather than a class. We trialed subject TAs in our secondary school, so I would put TAs in a subject team, so they were always with that team, so they kind of got to know each other, and that worked well. Respecting your working hours, supporting your boundaries when your boundaries are being challenged. So you should be able to feel able to go to your line manager or speak to someone if that's the case. Policies and procedures that support you holding healthy boundaries. So, policies that are kind of embracing of staff well-being, not just how do we make this happen regardless. We said regular opportunities for reflective practice is brilliant that so many of you are getting supervision. And you should feel comfortable to go and speak to your team leader, your line manager, if you are not getting what you need. And that is one of the biggest challenges, isn't it? Just one thing. Oh, that didn't work. I don't know why that hasn't worked. Okay. I'm going to let you think about this on your own without sharing it. I want you to try and think about one thing you're going to commit for your well-being. Is there one person that you always say yes to and now you're going to try and say no to? One thing that you're going to do, making sure you leave on time, making sure you have a lunch break, making sure you kind of sit away from the children, whatever it is, one thing that you're going to commit to for the benefit of your well-being.